Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Michael Tremblay.
And I'm Caleb Ontiveros.
And today we are talking about the Stoics and Homer, or more specifically, Stoicism and the Odyssey, kind of a Stoic book review of the Odyssey. So Caleb and I have each read it. Great book. Caleb, you've read it. It was a reread for you. It was my first time reading it. This was partly inspired because there's the Christopher Nolan Odyssey movie coming out shortly. And I was like, I want to be able to compare this or say if he did a good job or not. And then partially motivated by the fact that I was like, I really should read this. It's a pretty influential book to the ancient thinkers. And I always like to think about, we go and we read the Stoics, but the Stoics were reading or listening to Homer. And that was intellectual and cultural tradition from before their time that they were kind of looking up to and responding to. So I thought it would be a fun book to talk about today and to review. So before we jumped into it, I wanted to provide a bit of context. So why, we are a Stoicism podcast, but why, a Stoic inspired book review of the Odyssey, and a couple reasons. First is that I did some research before this episode, and all three of the original leads of the Stoic school, so Zeno, Cleanthes, and Chrysippus, they all wrote on Homer. We've lost a lot of this, but this was a kind of tradition or book that the Stoics were responding to. Zeno's longest work, or possibly his longest work, was called Homeric Problems. And it was some interpreters or some classicists believe that it was an attempt to interpret Homer as a Stoic or reconcile Homer with Stoic teachings and thought, the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Philodemus in particular, he says that Chrysippus and Cleanthes sought to harmonize Stoic doctrines with the works of Homer. So the Stoics were responding to and interested in the Odyssey, in the Iliad. And we see that in the Roman Stoics, the sources that we still have. Epictetus references Homer to his students. In Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 28, he has this lovely passage about how all of the Iliad and the Odyssey rested on impressions. These are like the most significant stories, these incredible battles and wars. They all depended upon impressions and how people responded to them. So if Paris did not have an impression to run away with Helen of Troy, then the entire Iliad would have been lost, and the Odyssey too. And so it's this point about how all of human action, folly, greatness is reducible to making use of impressions. Very Epictetus idea, making good use of our impressions of situations, or bad uses as well. And Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations, Book 11, Section 31, he quotes the Odyssey. He says, "And my heart laughed within," which is from the scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus has successfully tricked the Cyclops, blinded him, and got his men away to the relative safety of his ship. So the Cyclops is eating Odysseus's men, has them trapped, and he's tricked them, and he's like, my heart has laughed at having successfully tricked you and escaped. So I want to kind of continue in this Stoic tradition. Let's treat this book as an important one, worth considering, with many lessons. And then I also wanted to structure this conversation around what parts of the Odyssey are Stoic in nature, what parts do I think resonate with Stoic themes and teachings, and which parts are not Stoic or unstoic. Maybe which parts are Homeric problems for the Stoic, or just different ways of portraying greatness or virtue than the Stoics might. Anything to add to that before we jump into it?
Yeah, well, this is a good topic. I think it's somewhat daunting just because the Odyssey is such a staple of Western, really, world literature. I mean, it's probably one of the top 5 foundational works, certainly in the West, top 10 in the world. Seems like a very plausible claim. And at least the conjunction of the Odyssey and the Iliad, I should say. At least Homer should certainly be up there just because of the massive influence on people in general, pivotal figures in history, whether that's a matter of the political, artistic, philosophical arena. And as you say, the Stoics themselves interacted with Homer, which is I think very cool. Yeah, it's a good topic. I think it's about the third time I've read the Odyssey. It is a book many people might first encounter in school, which can be unfortunate. I think there's a way in which being forced to read a book makes it less enjoyable. That was certainly the case for me. But coming back to different translations, I think it really is worth revisiting, and it does have a number of philosophical themes, and there's a reason why it's been so influential. So I think that place in the canon is certainly justified.
Yeah, good points. We were joking, Caleb, that doing this is like we're gonna do a book review in an hour on the Bible or something. Maybe not. Maybe the Bible is one of those things that's above the. If this is top 5, maybe that's number 1. But it's like kind of something in that scope. People obviously do their entire dissertations. They spend their entire career focusing on sub aspects of this single work. So this is very much going to be a survey. But that's a fun project. It's a fun project as well.
Yeah, and I think what makes these works approachable is, in some sense, that they do have this incredible depth, but also anyone can pick up the Odyssey and read through the story and find familiar themes. So I think it has at once both that sort of daunting aspect to at least to comment on it, but is also very accessible, really.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to kick off with a plot summary, just in case, just to refresh people and to hopefully make this engaging for those who maybe haven't read it or haven't read it in a while or are familiar with the idea. I think everybody could kind of describe it in larger strokes about, Odysseus is trying to get home. He's taking a long journey back. But I'll go through kind of the main plot points because those will be the ones we're responding to. Again, really at a high level. So the Odyssey as a book is about the 10-year journey that Odysseus spends traveling home at the end of the Trojan War. So the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. It's the story of Achilles, Helen of Troy, Paris, Hector, and Odysseus is a character. He is the king of Ithaca, and he fights in that war. The war concludes, and he is trying to make it home. And he keeps getting waylaid, or things keep intervening in that process. And it ends up being this 10-year journey home after a 10-year battle in Troy. So it's actually this 20 years away from home. There's lots of things that he encounters on this trip home. So there's mutiny of his crew. There's the sirens, that famous story where people they put the beeswax in their ears so they can't hear the singing of the sirens, because they kind of entraps men if they hear that song. There's the Cyclops, that mythological figure. They end up on an island trapped in a cave with the Cyclops who's eating some of the men, and they have to trick their way out. There's Circe, who's a witch who turns his men into pigs. So all these kind of situations come up, and it's almost episodic, and something happens, portion of the crew dies terribly, and then they continue on their way. But what I didn't realize is that it's actually framed, it's not just that story, it's framed within another conflict, which is almost the main conflict. It's the opening of the story and the close of the story, which is that at home, Odysseus' wife Penelope is onset by suitors. And these are rich, powerful men from other states that are trying to marry her. She refuses to marry without confirmation of Odysseus' death, but the plausible deniability of his death is getting stretched over time, as other people return from the Trojan War and no one has news of Odysseus returning or being alive. And the suitors, because of some complex Greek norms that I don't really understand, they're not able to be kicked out. So they have to be treated like guests, and they're welcome, and they're staying. They're spending Odysseus' money and they're eating his food, but they're being disrespectful in return. So they're kind of being offered, they're being welcomed in as guests, but they're not maybe like reciprocating that respect, and they're kind of being disrespectful by staying in his space as well for this prolonged period of time. And the story actually starts with Odysseus' son, Telemachus, reaching a mature age and leaving to travel to Sparta to find news about his father, and just reaching like, I can't stand these suitors anymore. We've got to do something about them. I've got to find out if my father's alive, because they're eating us out of house and home. They're spending all our money, and we can't keep going on like this. And so at the climax of the story, after all those events we talked about, Odysseus returns to Ithaca after losing all of his men. He's alone. He's disguised as an old beggar by Athena. He infiltrates his home in disguise with the help of his son, who knows that he's home, but they haven't told his wife Penelope yet. He then tricks all the suitors into a challenge where he has to shoot an arrow with his own bow, Odysseus's bow, through the hole of 12 axes, or the holes of 12 axes. And the winner will win Penelope's hand. It's a bet, and all of the suitors are unable to do this challenge. And then Odysseus does it with his strength and knowledge of the bow. He earns Penelope's hand a second time, reveals his true identity, and then him and his son kill all the suitors, as well as the servants and maids that were unfaithful to his house or seemed to side with the suitors in the 10 years he was gone. And then the book ends with Athena intervening to stop retaliation from the families of the suitors, calling basically a ceasefire and saying, this is kind of the new steady state. Let's stop the fighting. These men got what they deserve. Let's return to a peaceful time. So overall, a happy ending, but one full of kind of bloodshed and, I guess, righteous revenge at the end. So that's it at a high level. Anything that you would add?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think it's worth remembering that Odysseus didn't want to go to Troy. And so he's a man who spent 20 years away from home and is certainly homesick while his home is in shambles, while his son grows up. He misses out on the childhood and, of course, misses out on the life of his kingdom, his wife, and more. So I think that's why often throughout the Odyssey, I think he's given terms like the man who knows pain or son of pain or something of this sort, because he has, he's undergoing a trial.
Yep. He's sad. He's wants to get home. He wants to be back with his family. Another thing, we won't go back to this, but I guess the funniest part I thought reading it for the first time, this has nothing to do with Stoicism, but I just thought when you encounter the sirens, there's that famous thing of Odysseus being tied to the ship, right? So he doesn't jump into the water or command his men to follow the sounds of the sirens. So all the men put beeswax in their ears, and Odysseus is tied to the ship. And I thought I thought he had to be tied to the ship for some reason, like he heard the sound accidentally, or he needed to be awake to the sound so that he could provide some sort of communication to his men. But in the book, he's just like, I just want to hear the song. I hear the song. I heard that song is like really cool, and like I'm interested in what the sirens sound like. So just like tie me up. You all plug your ears, but tie me up because I want to hear it. And I just thought that was. There's no theme to that. I just thought that was funny that Odysseus just wanted to hear the music. There was no sort of conflict or dilemma for that. That was that.
He has high. He has high openness to experience.
Yeah,
as we put it today. But yeah, I think it's you can also tie it to his craving for knowledge, perhaps his intelligence, and that kind of curiosity that wants to learn about the world, even these dangerous aspects about it. It's a dangerous experience, certainly listening to the sirens, but one he wanted to conquer or master or experience or something like this.
I just think it's funny because it's like, if it's worth having, he's just like, forget all my men. Like you all, like you could sell it as like, yeah, it's a difficult thing that's worth experiencing safely. But then even then he's like, yeah, but none of you get to do it. You all row, put some earplugs in and get rowing.
Yeah. There's certainly the hierarchy.
Cool. So in terms of, we'll go through some themes that came out, some Stoic themes and some non-Stoic themes. I'll kick things off. So the first idea that came out to me in this book was this theme of perseverance. So the Odyssey to me was fundamentally a story of persevering in the face of obstacles. I mean, you talk about it as a trial, but it's somebody who this is a hero who consistently fails. He's the hero. He's the smartest person in the room. but again and again, he I don't think necessarily because of his fault. I don't know necessarily if he makes bad decisions, but certainly fate, the gods, people more powerful than him come in between him and his goal, and he fails to achieve his goal again and again and again. And what he kind of does is refuses to give up. He refuses to stop pursuing. Almost reminds me of Lord of the Rings. I think about Lord of the Rings and the virtue of Frodo and just being somebody who, is just able to endure more than other people, as well as being, a virtuous person, kind, and not desiring the power of the ring, but also just like able to endure as a virtue in and of itself. And so for me, the Odyssey is kind of that celebration of that. This happens, this happens, this happens, but I keep going. And so you both have these bad things which kind of threaten to break Odysseus, but then you also have these temptations. So at multiple points, he's offered a permanent position with a beautiful woman. There's Circe, who wants to marry him. There's the nymph Calypso, who's a kind of demigod who actually he lives with for a number of years. I think like 7 or 8 years of the Odyssey is just him with Calypso, who's kept him as a, I guess almost like a romantic sexual partner, but not one that's free to leave. And then in one point he arrives at a state where is it Phaeacia? I'm not sure if I'm saying that one right. How do you say that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Phaeacia.
So he arrives in Phaeacia and he's, offered, the king loves him and he's offered to marry the beautiful young princess Nausicaa and, become a prince in this new land. And he's just like, oh, that's great. This is like a genuine temptation, but like, no, I just don't want to. I want to go home. I want to get back to my family. I want to be with my wife. And yeah, I think that's cool. That's inspiring. And it's a Stoic. I think it's this Stoic idea of, as opposed to like the cool, if you think of the hero as Achilles, the cool Achilles who goes out and he gets what he wants and he does what he wants. And his problem is his own character, his own anger. Odysseus has this virtuous goal to be reunited with his family. All these things keep getting in the way, and his way of controlling what's up to him is just to continue to persevere, continue to take steps towards the goal, and then eventually that's rewarded. He achieves his goal. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think he perseveres both through pain and pleasure, as it were. So, but that's that piece of temptation that he needs to, encounter, overcome. And I've seen it. I know some people, an initial reaction to the Odyssey is that they see Odysseus as almost incompetent, or he doesn't come back with his men. Maybe that's one knee-jerk reaction. Whereas, of course, other people might have the completely opposite reaction, where he's exceptionally, intelligent, gifted, favored by the gods. But I, in some ways, I do think it's a good picture of competency in a difficult arena where Odysseus makes mistakes, he gets unlucky, but also makes some excellent decisions. And I think up close, a lot of competency often looks like that, and especially in situations like war or any journey like this that's demands cooperation between different people, strangers, combating nature. So I think in any situation like that, even very competent people are going to make excellent decisions. Of course, that's what makes them competent, and they limit their mistakes. Odysseus doesn't make the kinds of mistakes his crewmen do, but he still does make serious mistakes that are both arguably reveal flaws in his character. So, but I think that's consistent with all that's to say. I think that's consistent with being exceptionally competent, and of course, part of his competency is in his ability to persist where others might not.
Yeah, I think that I like that point about real competency. Think about like a great baseball team that has like a winning percentage. I think even the best teams, they're like 60%, 65%. something like this. It's competency in really difficult arenas means coming out ahead more often than not, or it might mean staying in the game long enough to have the good outcome. And he displays that a kind of more realistic picture of human competency than somebody who just makes perfect decisions, especially in situations where outcomes are unknown. Because I think that's also part of Stoicism, is that you're not going to have perfect outcomes because you're always going to be making the decisions on limited or flawed information. And so part of doing the best with what's up to you is, and I don't think Odysseus is perfect. I don't think he does the best with what's up to him necessarily, but sometimes, you can make the best plan. And if Poseidon says, you know what, I don't like this guy, it doesn't matter how good your plan was. And so there's a real kind of subservience. Yeah, there's like this subservience to fate, or I don't know if subservience is the right word, this like willingness to endure fate or to be endure things more powerful than you and then continue to persevere, which is yeah, I think Stoic.
Yeah, I think so. It may also be, and I'd like to revisit this, a good model for how to respond to mistakes you've made. Which is, I think if you put it, I wonder if there's a better way to put this, but that's while listening to the story or reading it again, I thought maybe there's something there. He doesn't exactly dwell on his mistakes, but you don't see him repeat the mistakes he makes. So an instance of this is he taunts the Cyclops when he shouldn't, and that causes trouble for him and his men. He sort of is ungracious in victory, which I think arguably is a mistake he doesn't make later in the book. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see him repeating, these kinds of mistakes, or nor dwelling on them, of course.
He taunts. They escape the Cyclops in a ship, and he taunts them in some way. And then the Cyclops throws, I think it's like a giant rock, but they're not quite far enough away yet, and the rock almost just entirely destroys the ship. And there's just this kind of like, oh, oops moment. Like that could have been really bad, and we didn't need to do that. But yeah, I like the idea of the emotionally resilient, but hyper receptive to like new information. There's something to that. Like you're picking up skills, you're developing your craft, but you're not kind of emotionally dwelling on failures or mistakes in a way that's unproductive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What? Oh, did you want to ping pong them, or do you want to go for
Let's ping pong.
Okay, cool. So one aspect of the Odyssey that I do think is Stoic is highlighting intelligence as a virtue, as a part of prudence, as a part of wisdom, perhaps a sub component of wisdom. Odysseus is known for being exceptionally quick mentally, for being creative, coming up with solutions to problems. Of course, in the Iliad, he, I believe, is the one who comes up with the idea of using a Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. Certainly argues for it. He's the one who comes up with a crafty idea for escaping the Cyclops cave, dealing with the suitors and so on, and is favored by Athena, the goddess of wisdom, in part because of his ability to think clearly. And that's contrasted perhaps with with his peers, I suppose, his heroic peers, people like Achilles, who's known perhaps more for swiftness of body than swiftness of mind, or Agamemnon, the king. And I think there's something. It's not to say there's sort of a worship of intelligence, or that's the only value, of course, in the Odyssey. But there's something in highlighting that ability, praising it, and that being connected to the pursuit of knowledge. Of course, the ability to make good decisions, and I think that's a Stoic theme.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, I'm not enough of a classicist to know the answer to this, but I think it's interesting to it's an interesting question of who's the real hero of that duology. Is it Achilles or Odysseus? And I must assume it's Odysseus if he's the one that gets the happy ending. Like if he is really the archetype of the excellent Greek man for the ancient Greeks, then that is one with an emphasis in intelligence, as you said, emphasis in prudence, intellect, good decision making. But then this is not to say they're not, but then they're also interested in the body, right? Like he's also still incredibly strong and fit. There's all these really funny
Right.
scenes in the Odyssey where he's either disguised as an old man or Athena makes him look weaker than he is. And then he, takes off his shirt and he has got this huge chest or something. Everybody's like, oh my God, this beggar is so
Yeah, this
incredibly,
beggar's ripped.
yeah, this is wild. Uh, it's just is like all those
He
things are
wins a
making me
discus
laugh.
competition.
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, it's almost like there's still a emphasis on the physical, but agree with you that it puts this like skillful decision making as the kind of ultimate mm, heroic trait.
Yeah, I think so. At least it's, I think, essential to why Odysseus is a hero. Certainly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another Stoic theme. So agree with you there on intelligence, the importance of intelligence. Another Stoic theme that comes out in this is this idea of exile, being a guest, cosmopolitanism. So the respect you do or do not treat guests or other humans or people from other cities in virtue of them being guests versus members of your community. It's like a lot of time people spend in other people's houses, showing up as strangers, and a lot of people are constantly judged by how well they treat strangers or how poorly they treat strangers. Um, so sometimes Odysseus is treated poorly, like by the Cyclops. Like he's like, "Hi, Cyclops. I just would like some food, and we need some shelter." And the Cyclops is like, "I think I will eat you, instead." And that's a bad way to treat a guest. And then, like I was saying before, when he's in Phaeacia, he's treated really well. They're like, "Stay forever. We'd love to have you here." Then Odysseus, he returns back to Ithaca in disguise, and then he's treated like a guest in his own land. And again, you get this moral judgment of people. Some people are really kind to him, even though he looks like a beggar, and some people are judgmental of him as a beggar. And the suitors are like, "Get out of here! We don't need your kind of thing." And implicitly, we're supposed to judge these people for that. They're not treating strangers well. They're not treating the poor well. They're kind of breaking this virtue of treating people like guests properly. So it also made me reflect on the importance of cosmopolitanism, how fragile we are as people, how much we rely on the kindness of others. I think today's society can make us feel more resilient than we are because it's so uncommon for us to ever really be alone in the wilderness, for us ever to, come upon somebody and say, "Hey, can I have some water and some shelter?" and need that. And if the person says no, you might die, or you might lose a couple toes in the cold. We don't really have those moments where it's Odysseus constantly encountering those moments as a true exile. And we're seeing the value, the virtue of cosmopolitanism in action when people accept him, welcome him, clothe him. I'll stop there. Anything to add to that?
There's the ancient Greek idea of xenia, kind of morality or custom for hospitality, where hosts and guests have their own respective obligations, parts to play. And I think that's sort of the essential, I think that is the essential norm in the Odyssey, and characters are evaluated by whether they are good hosts or good guests. And of course, you see it in the story of the Cyclops. The suitors are terrible guests and are judged as terrible people for that reason. There's also the many incidents, of course, but there's the giants that are terrible hosts to Odysseus' crew. There's Odysseus' crew who are terrible guests and consume the cows of Helios, the sun god, cows that were not owed, or that were not theirs. You get a little bit more of a mixed picture with Circe, perhaps. But something that makes the interactions of Odysseus with many people, why Odysseus comes out on top, as it were, or has the god's favor, is that he is both a good guest and a good host. He follows the rituals, accepts gifts, speaks to his hosts exceptionally well. When he's in Ithaca, you see him, treat both goat herders and nobility with the same amount of respect, at least initially, and then if they respond poorly, then he'll respond poorly, of course. But you have that initial, that initial olive branch of a good host, of a good guest that Odysseus provides others. And
yeah, I think those are some great examples. I don't think we talk about that this much. We don't think we talk about that virtue that much anymore. I don't think we emphasize it that much. I mean, maybe we think about this on a political level. You think about like our responsibilities towards refugees, or our responsibility towards immigration. I think maybe you see that on the individual level. About some people, there is some hosting at an individual level still, and some kind of social norm. But it almost comes off like a social norm nowadays. If someone comes over and you're supposed to say, "Well, can I get you a drink?" rather than here, where it's like we're judging people's character in this epic story based on their capacity to host, and as you said, basically based on their capacity to be a good guest as well. It's just it has such moral weight to it in the story.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Perhaps when you think about being a good host in ordinary life, being a good guest in ordinary life, it often is much lower stakes, and perhaps for that reason may seem to have much lower moral weight. You think about being a good host, that's someone who knows how to entertain, which is part of being a good host in the Odyssey. But the entertainments are quite extreme if you think about the Phaeacians again, or they're very elaborate, essentially throwing games in honor of Odysseus. But it's also much more than merely knowing how to entertain. There's serious gifts that have material and political implications. The way in which King Nestor is a good host to Telemachus, I think, really goes above, just simply knowing how to entertain. So I think there's maybe it is something to think more about as a skill, as a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's also the political idea is interesting. I think it's almost, perhaps there's a small distinction here between cosmopolitanism and the Xenia of the Odyssey, where it really matters that you're face to face with your host and your guest, and in a sense, such a smaller idea, perhaps, than cosmopolitanism, which is about, at the political scale, everyone is, in some sense, a citizen of the world. At the cosmic scale, it's, everyone's a human being. Everyone's rational. Perhaps that can ground, these norms of being a good guest, being a good host and such. But there's a sense in which that does seem like a larger idea than what you get in the Odyssey. I'm not sure what you think about that.
Yeah, I like that distinction. I mean, this is the distinction. Cosmopolitanism is one way to ground why you need to be a good host, because, as you said, it's this idea that we are all part of the same universe. There's two ways to think about being a good host. It's like, I need to host you because you're something other than me, and there's certain obligations we have towards people that are other than us, to be nice to them because they might return the favor someday. They might reciprocate because we're in a position to do so. And then cosmopolitanism is to say, you need to be nice to that person because they're literally not other to you. They are not, they are part of your city. They are part of your family. And family is taking the metaphor further, but you are part of the same state. So I'm not being nice to somebody from another country. We are all from the same country of being human. So it is a step further. I agree. It just feels very cosmopolitan. Ironically, good hosting in the Odyssey, even though they're very clear, like, I'm from Ithaca, I'm from this place, I'm from that place, because they reciprocate these good norms of welcoming, they almost feel more cosmopolitan than people do today. So yeah, there's something about that, about maybe you end up at a similar place.
Yeah, there's a related theme here that I think fits well with Stoicism, but it's not always what we emphasize, which is it's almost like tact as a virtue, as an essential skill, social tact, and I think that's related to this idea of being a good guest and being a good host. But you see Odysseus, generally he acts with great tact with both his hosts and his enemies. He asserts himself, but he allows others to save face. Think about his interactions with the Phaeacians in particular. He knows how to compliment people well, perhaps without overdoing it. And there's a funny situation where he's sort of called out for avoiding some of the games by a young Phaeacian, and he's able to start beat his chest a little bit and prove his worth by winning a short discus contest. But he doesn't go overboard with it in a way that other Greek characters might. So I think he has that kind of. He's certainly very socially skilled, socially intelligent. You see the same attribute in his wife, Penelope. They're not, in contrast to some of the suitors would be the obvious contrast, I think, who act in a kind of reckless way, who don't treat either their superiors or people who might lower than them on the status hierarchy with social skill. With they're not classy people, one might say. So I think that's cool to see that as an essential part of treating people well, thinking about tact perhaps as a sub component, sub virtue of that project.
So I just had to look up the definition of tact to make sure, because that's one of those words where I think I could use it in a sentence, but I have to be 100% certain. So that just says really skilled at navigating difficult situations without upsetting people or offending people. Is this how you meant it?
Yeah, I think it's what's a kind of social sensitivity, perhaps.
Yeah.
That makes you can sort of, if you think about difficult situations you've been in, someone with tact is able to maybe bring up a difficult point or compliment someone well and land the plane, as it were. And you almost wonder if they're going to be able to pull it off, and then they do, or if it feels seamless in the end. So,
well, and you compare this to the main conflict, one of the main conflicts in the Iliad, which is Achilles having poor tact and fighting with Agamemnon, who's the leader of the troops. They're kind of getting at it with each other. Achilles refuses to participate because he doesn't feel appropriately respected. Agamemnon doesn't feel appropriately respected, and they're kind of at this point of non-communication. They haven't settled it. Neither of them can swallow their pride enough to talk to each other properly. It is a poor tact situation, and so this is a good contrast. And the thing about tact,
that's a good example. Well, sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a great example. Agamemnon feels like he's not being respected as the greatest king. Achilles believes he's not being respected as the greatest warrior, and it's noteworthy that Agamemnon sends Odysseus to talk to Achilles when Achilles is sulking and Agamemnon wants him back on the battlefield. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, exactly. Yeah, he's the tax master. And again, it's I don't know if you feel this way, Caleb. Maybe it's just growing up the way I grew up. You kind of push back against these social norms as being shallow, this idea of be a good host, have tact. It almost seems they're almost these inauthentic virtues. It's don't express it feels it's when you're a teenager, it feels like I can't express myself honestly. I can't say what I really think. I just have to worry about offending people. Why can't I talk about politics and religion at dinner kind of thing. And so it's interesting to see it presented here in who is a rather mature character as, clearly this is not a shallow person trying to maintain good face for shallow reasons. This is somebody who thinks tact is an important part of being a great ruler and a good mature adult. And I think you hit on that idea of sensitivity of that's really what it is it's like, what's the opposite of tact? Maybe it's being, too emotionally sensitive to engage in this, but it's probably just being so self-obsessed because you get offended or you get focused on what you're talking about that you're not paying attention to other people. You're not considering what other people are thinking or feeling. And so that tact is that being sensitive to other people. We had this idea, we did a episode on this recently about like standing up for yourself, which is like list this ability that you try to hit in Stoicism of understanding other people, not bulldozing over them, but also not conceding and just doing whatever they want. That kind of middle ground is what I see tact as. You're not going to make a bigger stink than you have to get your point across. You're not going to offend unnecessarily. But, if I need to jab out the Cyclops' eye with a burning spear, I will do it. But that's not, I don't have to be, I don't have to be rude. I just have to do what I have to do.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I also think I come from, and perhaps it's obvious to people that this is, how you speak to people really matters, both for your own sake and for their sake. Being sensitive to others is important. But I do think there are at least some aspects of culture that maybe don't value social tact as much. You might see it in more academic or nerdy circles where the kind of speech that's prized as exceptionally literal, bluntness perhaps is valued. And I think there are reasons to both be literal and often to be blunt in many kind of situations, but perhaps one can do so, of course one can do so poorly. And sometimes it seems like that might be those sorts of social norms can be an excuse for just being socially lazy.
Yeah, don't be lazy. Be intentional and sensitive to what's going on. I think that's a general Stoic takeaway, and Odysseus certainly isn't lazy. I wanted to get now to some non-Stoic themes. One that came out to me is this idea of emotional heroes. So something that struck me in this story is the amount that Odysseus cries, the amount that he grieves. He sits depressed for 7 years with Calypso. Calypso is the nymph I was mentioning who takes him on as a, I don't know if I want to say sex slave, but like somebody who has to live with her unconsensually. And she's like, come on, I'm beautiful. You could just like, I'm divine. You could live with me. And he's just like, I just really want to get back to my wife. And he's just like, he's very, very sad. When at one point in the story, he hears a story about Troy told from a storyteller. The storyteller recounts the story of Troy and the Trojan War, and he openly cries. And so I think we get here this masculine hero that feels deeply. So he's not feeling the burning anger of Achilles, but he's still feeling very deeply. He's persevering against things that weigh on him deeply. And I suppose this is not any surprise. It's just not the Stoic. Odysseus is not the hero who is the Stoic sage who rises above it all and sits in kind of the clouds and is not concerned with earthly things. It's a very non-Stoic way of telling a hero. It's somebody who encounters tragedy and then overcomes them through the strength of their character and the strength of their decisions. But these things are very much tragedies to him. As you said, him missing the aging of his son becoming an adult, him being away from his wife, Penelope. These are very much tragedies. And it's okay for this masculine hero. I was at least reading the book as saying it's okay for him to be sad about it. What matters then is what you do next.
Yeah, you don't have the kind of, I think it's both interesting from a Stoic perspective, where Odysseus' grief is not seen as a character flaw, which is somewhat anti-Stoic, but also, of course, from a perspective of modern masculinity, where the fact that he cries openly is not seen as making him less of a man, and does so in multiple occasions. So I think that's interesting as well. and probably is, I think essentially rooted in the fact that Homer is not a Stoic. He does value what the Stoics would call indifference. And if you're robbed from of these indifference, whether it's wealth, glory, relationships, that's something worth grieving over. You've been harmed, and indeed you can seek revenge in some cases, and it would be good of you to do so.
Yeah, it is like a more traditional conception of right and wrong. It's not a stoic. It's not a stoic view of value. Yeah, there are times when it's appropriate to seek revenge. I don't think Odysseus avoids the kind of irrational anger of an Achilles. Maybe like his anger doesn't make him dumb. At least maybe not often. Maybe sometimes he gets a little bit too cocky or a little bit riled up. But this is not a it's hard to tell because he finds out about the suitors very late, right? Only when he arrives on the island, and then he concocts a plan and then he executes the plan. It's not like he's waiting for 10 years to get back and is like nursing this vengeance over that period of time. He has a goal that's based in the pursuit of a good thing. And then when he comes home, he identifies a problem in his land, and then he takes steps to rectify it. Not even so much revenge as just, there's these kind of invaders. There's these people in my house, and I need to get them out.
Yeah, I do think that's rooted in revenge, though. It's and as a matter of sort of seeing him, Odysseus sees the suitor's presence as disrespecting him, his house, his wife, his son, which is probably correct judgment, but thinks they're the right punishment for them would be death. And I think there are certainly are descriptions of him being angry, but as you say, he doesn't lose his head over it, even if it does motivate his actions. I think there's the scene where he comes to Ithaca as a vagrant, and some other vagrant makes fun of him. Do you remember this? He's like, "Get off the porch," or something like this. I can't exactly remember what the disagreement is over. He's like, "You're not you're not the vagrant in this area. I am." And they come to blows, and there's a specific scene where Odysseus thinks through. I think he's both recognized as being angry, but thinks through. Should I just kill him? Should I really beat him up, or just give him a good whack? And decides to do the latter because he doesn't want to reveal that he's someone unusual, of course, or to have any giveaways because of who he was, even though this homeless guy is respecting him, the former king of Ithaca, and that does get to him.
Yeah, he keeps his head, and he's able to make a choice, and makes the prudent choice while still enacting out the revenge or the punishment for the being disrespected.
Yeah, what do you think about the killing of the suitors? I think some people argue that might be a prudential mistake. I think there are arguments on the opposite side, though, as well, because that does cause later conflict.
To be honest, I find the whole suitor thing really strange. That he shows up and then he has to win Penelope's heart or her hand truthfully again, that he doesn't just show up and is just like, I never lost this hand. It's a weird thing that he has to challenge them and then conquer them in a fair challenge, but it's a fair challenge that he tricked them into. So I find the whole resolution of the conflict quite strange. So he kills them all, but he does it kind of in a sneaky way where, if I'm remembering properly, him and his son and a couple other loyal people kind of trap them in an area where they don't really have access to their weapons, and he's supported by Athena to really execute the slaughter effectively, instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm coming home. I'll if you guys are still there, we're gonna have a fight." Instead of this trial by open combat or something. I don't know. Prudentially, it's hard for me to say if it's a bad move because all we have is the information from the book.
Sure.
I think it ended up going fine, so it ended up being okay. Odysseus's argument there is going to be they're just going to kill me, and then when they kill me, they're going to be able to rightfully claim Penelope's hand because there's going to be evidence that I'm dead. And they have to, at this point, we haven't really talked about this, but they have taken steps to kill him, or sorry, at least taken steps to kill his son. Mm-hmm. So they've shown themselves to be like willing to murder. And so if you believe that they're going to kill him and then marry his wife, then I think he should take what it's almost this act of self-defense instead of revenge, I would say. And then in that sense, it seems to me justified, but it depends on if you believe that.
Right. Yeah. There is, of course, they are threatening the life of his son, threatening to take his wife away. And they're threatening his life of his son in more than one way. There's, the explicit murder plot, but there's also the idea that the son is next in line to be the king, but probably a number of the suitors have designs on, if were they to take Penelope's hand, becoming king. And that's explicitly mentioned. And, perhaps the counter argument to managing the suitors more gracefully or having a softer touch there is that it's perhaps doesn't reveal or doesn't resolve a fissure that's already happened. There's a power vacuum and it needs to be forcefully addressed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that's some of the whether it does seem like at least from whether or not it was the right thing to do prudentially to the extent those things can be distinguished. At least some of the suitors needed to be.
Maybe that's the better.
They were fated to die, but
could you have done it? Could you have done one or two and then been like,
yeah? Could you
let that be a lesson to you?
With
Did you have to do all of them?
Yeah.
I think there's even the scene now, if I'm remembering properly, because it's a blur at the end where they're like, and then there was this guy, and he was the nicest of the guys. He was the most respectful of the suitors, but we still just killed him anyway, if I'm remembering properly. So they really just do go through all of them.
Yeah, perhaps the Stoic idea, there's even a little bit of wrong is wrong. Mm-hmm. That's something that came to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
And perhaps that's something that Homer would embrace here. It's like the suitors just cross the line or something like this. And the maids as well. Maids of the household.
Yeah, that's an interesting... I read the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood right after, which is a retelling of the Odyssey from the perspective of Penelope, and with this emphasis on the maids that get killed, because Odysseus is basically he's like, what of the staff have remained loyal to me, and which of the staff have slept with, consorted with, become friends with the suitors, and have not remained loyal, and those ones he kills. And the Penelopiad is this. It's a modern retelling of the Odyssey from the more female-centric perspective, and kind of demonizes that in particular. Like, it's one thing to kill the suitors; it's another thing to kill all the maids who are in a much worse position of power. Right? Like, they don't. If the suitor wants to joke around with them, if the suitor wants to sleep with them, they're not really in a position to resist or say no, because these are relatively wealthy, powerful men from other states. They're there as guests. It kind of took that perspective. And I thought that was an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't read that. Perhaps I should. I often like retellings of these ancient stories.
It's really short too, so it's like almost like a little epilogue. Mm-hmm. I read it in a day or two.
Oh, very nice. Cool. Any other non-Stoic themes you want to hit on, or you want to hit on?
No, that's it for me. Do you have some?
Well, one other one, then we can call it a wrap. I know we're a little bit over, but it's at least worth shouting out, which is, I think we've praised Odysseus' intelligence, his tact, but there is also an aspect to the man that is tricky, deceitful. Part of speaking, his speaking well isn't always a matter of saying true things. Perhaps for Odysseus, he's crafty. There's a hilarious bit where he lands on Ithaca, doesn't know where he is, bumps into Athena, who's in disguise, and Athena's like, "Oh, who are you?" And Odysseus starts crafting some tale about who he is that's completely completely false. And Athena's like, of course I'm Athena. You don't need to go through this rigmarole with me, though I respect it. And there's a sense in which I think that is non-Stoic, even though perhaps there's an aspect to that is closely related to, the social skill. The extent to which Odysseus does it perhaps is, I think, not in line with, not necessarily, at least it's not a straightforward contradiction with Stoic philosophy or Stoic characters, but the kinds of people Stoics often admire are much more straightforward, laconic, as opposed to, more, Odysseus is really skirting the edge of being a bullshitter would be one way to put it. He's almost there, but he somehow manages to pull it off. And I don't think Stoics are often in that area.
Yeah, there's like this stereotype of the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States where it goes, not to offend any West Coasters out there, or maybe you can take not sure which one's worse. The East Coast people are like, they're rude to your face, but they'll help you when you're in trouble. And people on the West Coast will be really kind and really nice, and then they won't help you when you need help. And this is kind of if you're going to take a cynical view to like being a good guest, having tact, it's like this obsession with the social norms, but not with the virtue that goes underneath. And so you can read this somebody who has excellent tact as being a good manipulator, as someone who's just sensitive to other people, so able to tell them what they want to hear, to say what people want to think. And so I think about that in this way, where I think like anything else, the words you use are indifferent. So it's just about what you're using them for. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's okay to bullshit for good reasons. I think it's bad to bullshit for bad reasons. But you get a sense more that Odysseus is just following his own reasons. And if it helps him, he'll tell you one thing. And if it hurts him, he'll tell you another. And I agree with you. I never thought of this before, but I agree with you that the contrast is kind of the Stoic position, which is, I'm going to tell you what I think. And, the Epictetus line, I'm going to tell you what I think. And if you cut my head off or throw me in jail, that's a you problem. Like, that's a you thing. My job is to just tell you what I think, is very much more the Stoic position. I think part of that has become because the bullshitting is like, it's really trying to like intervene in the outcomes of things. It's like really thinking, well, if I say the right thing here and I do the right thing here, then they'll think this, which will make them do that, which will make them tell this person this, and then I'll get the outcome I want. It's like a level of kind of like precision and planning around externals that maybe the Stoic is not inclined towards. At least not in at least not Epictetus' version of it.
Yeah, Epictetus certainly not. I think perhaps to the extent you can defend this from the Stoic perspective, it's thinking about someone like Seneca who has to get his hands dirty with political intrigue in order to. I think the defense of Seneca would be to make a bad situation slightly better, or something of this sort. He can't act like there's a senator who resists a tyrant to their face, simply saying, being an excellent senator, taking that to be, saying someone who, being someone who speaks truth to power, as it were, even if that may result in their death. But there's also the political player who perhaps decides, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to try to work behind the scenes to improve the world, which has its risks. It's certainly a risky strategy, but I think that would be the kind of defense of it.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, it comes down at that point with the kind of sample size we have. Are we going to really say that Seneca's way is not the right way? It's not the Cynic way, which is definitely what Epictetus is inspired by. Mm-hmm. But I guess it comes down to the original point, which is like, why are you doing it? Are you trying to work behind the scenes because you genuinely think that's the best way to enact the best outcome? Or are you doing this because, you don't want to be brave and say the right thing, get thrown in jail because you're afraid of jail? And it takes a pretty advanced person to like tell the difference between those two.
Right. And it's probably the kind of thing where most people were you to do this would be making a mistake, but there's some set of people, some set of situations where it's the right play or something.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Great.
Well, we made it. We should revisit the Odyssey at some point. Perhaps we'll do the Iliad. Maybe one of the modern retellings. That could be fun as well.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a really fun book. I listened to it, my first ever audiobook, and I thought that was fine because I was like, this is a great way to get into it because this was originally from an oral tradition. But I think worth listening to, worth engaging with, just for all the reasons we said about really very, very influential. You'll see all the references, and I always think it's so valuable to see those references and go, oh, that's actually what happened, or that's, actually how the story went, because you see all these parodies of them. But enjoyed it, would recommend to anybody listening if you haven't already. And like I said, there's the Christopher Nolan film coming out shortly, so this will be getting very popular.
Yeah, we should do a movie review.
Compare and contrast. Thanks, Gil.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.